Thanks for joining me for our next video in our pollinator identification training series. In this video, we're going to talk about beetles. I want to start this video with a disclaimer. Beetles are the most diverse order of insects that we are going to touch on in this training series. There are over 400,000 described species worldwide, and this is just a brief group of categories that we're going to use for our survey purposes. It is not comprehensive, and it is not scientifically strict. Beetles alone make up 40% of all described arthropods and as much as a quarter of all known animal species. There are estimates suggesting that we expect between 1 to 2 million total species to be out there. In Colorado, some figures from a 2023 report from the C.P. Gillette Museum of Arthropod Diversity at Colorado State University suggests that we have approximately 12 to 1,300 genera and over 3,500 species in the state alone. Today in this video, we're just going to look at some of the groups that we are most likely to see on our surveys. Beetles are order Coleoptera, meaning sheath wing, and their elytra are what are going to define them as a group. The elytra are forewings that have adapted to be hardened and protecting of the other wings, and they are not used for flight. These elytra are what looks like the shell on the back of a beetle, and usually what is uniquely patterned or has other distinguishing characteristics that we can use to identify their group. As a very general rule, we usually describe beetles as being hairless, though we will see this is not true even just in the few groups that we will mention for this video. When we do see hair on them, we typically see them on the elytra or the underside of the abdomen. We generally describe beetles as clumsy flyers. You can see on the image on the right a ladybug taking flight, where the elytra are raised up and out of the way of the wings that are used for powered flight, and you can see the abdomen drop a little bit below the plane of those wings, with the legs spread out. This is typical flight behavior in beetles. Their landing is typically not very graceful. Beetles vary dramatically in size, from being incredibly tiny, as we will see mostly with weevils in this presentation, to being rather large. Some of those larger beetles are blister beetles, family Meloidae. These beetles are best known for their chemical defenses that can leave blisters on the skin when provoked. These guys are generally about an inch, though many species may be smaller. Key identifying characteristics for this group include a small thorax when compared to the head, with the head being much wider than the thorax, and making the thorax kind of look like a neck on the beetle. In this group, the elytra covering the wings do not extend to the end of the abdomen, so it may always look like the abdomen is poking out. These beetles are generally neutrally colored as far as the most common species that we will see, but we also have some brightly metallic colored and spotted and red beetles in our area. As another general rule, these guys will have relatively straight sides and straight back along the elytra, as opposed to a domed or curved posture. Longhorn beetles, or family Cerambycidae, are in the same general size category as the blister beetles, getting to about an inch, with some species getting larger and some slightly smaller. These beetles are often brightly colored or brightly patterned, and can be told apart from the blister beetles by their elytra, which cover the entirety of their abdomen, their long antennae, which are often the entire body length of the insect, or even longer, and by looking at the thorax, which will be wider than the head in this case. They also do not have the chemical defenses that the blister beetles do. The most common longhorn beetle seen at Butterfly Pavilion is probably the milkweed longhorn beetle seen on the milkweed plants in our gardens. They are bright red with black antennae and black spots, and can be picked up safely. Our next family of beetles, the tumbling flower beetles, Mordelidae, are often overlooked because of their small size. They can even just look like a tiny black speck on a flower, and they're usually under a centimeter long, even for the largest ones. They're often very neutral in color. The ones I most commonly see here in Colorado are jet black. They have what looks like a pointed tail at the end of their abdomen, and their thorax and head are distinctly curled underneath their bodies, making them look overall like a tiny comma stuck on a flower. You can generally get very close to the flower that these beetles are sitting on while they're there without disturbing them to take a better look. However, if you do disturb them, by picking up the flower or something, they will often just fall off, hence the name tumbling flower beetle. This next group we'll call small dark flower beetles. This group will contain a couple of different families that are difficult to tell apart in the field. They're generally going to be on the small side, a couple of millimeters, generally no more than 5 millimeters, and look gray, black, even velvety or spotted, but never shiny. If we were able to get really close with like a handheld microscope in the field, we could see that they are covered in small hairs. In general, their antennae are going to be very short compared to the longhorn and blister beetles that we've seen so far, but this group will be very common across many of the flowers on both the eastern and western slopes. In contrast with our small dark flower beetles, we will also have a group for small shiny beetles. This group will also contain several families, some of which do overlap with our dark flower beetles. Many species in this group will be small, shiny, brightly colored, and somewhat difficult to tell apart, despite not being closely related. It can be tempting to use their colors and patterns to try and tell these beetles apart, but this is not a reliable method. Many apps, such as iNaturalist, may have difficulty telling these beetles apart in this category, and they don't yet provide reliable identifications at the family level. For our purposes, we'll include any small and shiny beetle, regardless of its color or pattern. Beetles in this grouping are more likely to have an oval or rounded shape down the back of their elytra to the end of their abdomen. Beetles in this group may or may not have elytra that cover all the way to the end of their abdomen, but in general they will not have long antennae like what we've seen with the longhorn beetles. While these last two categories were extremely broad, there may be other beetles that you recognize more at the species level. If you recognize a beetle at the species level, better than at our category level, please feel free to use that as well. It's really good to know what level of expertise our volunteers are coming in with. For example, I've included on the right a picture of a male Colops beetle. These beetles are quite unique in that the males have highly modified antennae that are distinct to their genus, so I can confidently identify this beetle at the genus level. Otherwise, it would belong to our small shiny beetle category. Let's take a look at some of the other beetles that are pretty common in this area that you might recognize already. Japanese beetles are an invasive but recognizable beetle that many people may find in their gardens. They seem to really like plants in the rose family, common fruit trees, and many of our ornamental plants. They have bright emerald thorax and heads, with copper to red elytra, and several tufts of white hair along the rear sides of the abdomen that give them the appearance of white spots. These guys are generally about half an inch long and can be found in large mating aggregations on ornamental plants, June through August. Ladybugs are a common favorite among the beetles. The classic red coloration with black spots is common for several native and introduced species. However, there is a surprising diversity within this family, the Coccinellidae. Some beetles can be black and white, orange, striped, or even yellow. Some may have no markings at all. The best way to tell if the beetle you're looking at is in the ladybug family while you're in the field is to look for that characteristic domed shape, with their body almost being circular rather than elongated as in some of the other families we've looked at. The bumble flower beetle may or may not be a beetle that you already recognize, but they're certainly distinct enough to earn their own category for identification. They're quite large and round, often the same size as many bumblebees. They also make a similar loud buzzing noise when they fly. They're often brownish or grayish, but often covered with pale or white hairs all over their bodies, though older beetles may have lost a significant amount of this. Like the Japanese beetle, they belong to the scarab family and have the very distinct scarab body shape. While they might not be the prettiest beetle on our list, their hair can make them effective pollinators, and they should be welcome in our gardens. The Colorado soldier beetle is probably the beetle I get asked to identify the most. Their orange coloration with black heads, black spots on the elytra and on the thorax are actually relatively distinct in our area. There are other similar related species and other species that look similar, but they're not overlapping in range with a lot of our study areas on the Front Range of Colorado. They may look similar to blister beetles, as their abdomen may poke out from underneath their elytra. However, their thorax is wider than their head and has a flattened appearance. These beetles are actually members of the soldier beetle family. Soldier beetles can be identified by this flattened thorax, However, this is the most commonly seen species. Ornate checkered beetles are common beetles on the smaller side, usually under half an inch. They have a metallic dark blue head and thorax and bright yellow patterns on their elytra. Their thorax may be about the same width as their head and look like an elongated turtleneck sweater. They're covered in very light hairs, which adds to this appearance. While the exact yellow and black pattern may vary on the elytra, there are very few other beetles in this area that I think look very similar, so they've earned their own category. While many online sources say that they appear to be associated with yarrow and buckwheat, I've most commonly seen these beetles on cactus flowers. Another group you're likely already familiar with are the weevils. While worldwide they can vary dramatically in size and shape, the most common ones we'll see in Colorado are pretty small, under a quarter of an inch, commonly gray or bluish, though I have seen red ones. Their head is a classic shape that's easily recognizable. That elongated rostrum in front of the eyes will hold the antennae much lower down from the eyes than other beetles. These antennae are also often bent and clubbed at the end. While we've covered a lot of taxa for our pollinator identification training series, not all flower visitors are demonstrated to be effective pollinators. Other animals you might commonly see on flowers may include crab spiders, jumping spiders, assassin bugs, and other true plant bugs. We won't ask you to be able to identify these animals, but if you do see them on your survey, you're welcome to write them down. We may not be focusing on them as a part of this current study, but we're happy to include them as a very important part of pollinator ecology. Writing these animals down can also help you hone your observation skills. As always, when you're completing your survey, identify the flower visitor to the level you're most confident in. Guessing creates unreliable data. We'd much rather have a description of what you think you may have seen. If there are no flower visitors, that's important data too. We still want your data sheet, even if it's mostly blank or unknown. Thanks for joining me today to take a look at some backyard beetles.